So the theory that underlies TIST is the theory of structural dissociation, which says that when we are traumatized, this physical split between the two sides of the brain becomes also a psychological split, so that the left can keep on living day-to-day life, right? The child who is abused can get up the next morning and go to school, while the right brain side of the personality holds the implicit memories, because remember, the right brain has no words. So it holds the implicit nonverbal memories of the trauma, and most importantly, an anticipation of the next and the next and the next trauma. I called the left brain part of the personality the going on with normal life part. And I called the right brain side of the personality the traumatized, because I wanted to have a way for my clients to have a relationship to the trauma rather than minimize it. It's very, very rare for people to have a single trauma. Most types of trauma, whether war, child abuse, domestic violence, terrorism, all are enduring. They're environmental. Day in, day out, the individual is under threat. Very, very important distinction. And the theory goes on to say that with chronic trauma, which, as you recall, is what D experienced as a child, more splitting is necessary because the trauma goes on for years. The child has to endure 18 to 20 years of trauma and has to be able to defend against different dangers at different times. So the theory says that on the one side, there is the going on with normal life part. On the other side, the subparts begin to develop. A part driven by the fight response, a part driven by the flight response, a part driven by the fear or freeze response, a part driven by the total submission response, and a part driven by the cry for help response. And I should say, any individual might have just some of those parts. Others might have 3 or 4 fight parts, 2 flight parts. It's possible in very, very complex PTSD or dissociative disorders to have many parts of each type. So my assumption was that what D had been experiencing was the activation of these parts right in the middle of her going on with normal life. And that, in fact, the more normal her life became, the more intrusions by these parts. I assume that each part contributes a different defensive approach. We know that the going on with normal life part has the survival imperative of functioning. And that describes the client who doesn't want to talk about it, who's worried about becoming overwhelmed, is more concerned about what's happening with the children or the job or the home than about the trauma or the emotions. The cry for help part presents usually in great distress, desperate for help, sweet, vulnerable, often even childlike. And that's a defensive strategy, and it works because as a therapist, you see the vulnerability, you see the desperation, and you want to help. The submit part has the defensive strategies of hopelessness, helplessness, trying to please people and avoid displeasing them. Often the submit part has a lot of shame, which certainly makes sense. Again, anxiety about being a bother or difficult. And of course, the submit part is usually the least difficult of all the parts. The defensive strategy of fear is to alarm the body. It's like a smoke alarm, right? The fear says, watch out, you're going to get hurt. Flight parts, human beings are not runners in the sense that a gazelle is a runner. But we have our own ways of running. Difficulty with commitment, often difficulty sustaining a therapeutic relationship, difficulty sustaining romantic relationships. And also, flight in humans is associated with addictive behavior and eating disorders, because both are ways of fleeing from emotion. And then we have the fight part. The fight part's defensive strategy is to take control through anger, mistrust, devaluing of the therapist, but also the fight response is the only defensive response associated with violence. And so the fight part is also associated with aggressive behavior, whether aggression toward others or aggression from our own bodies.